But I'd like to begin with just some initial thoughts. In many respects, I'm not really sure if most of us are Muslims in Britain anymore. Later on today, I understand you're going to have a session on history, on the history of Islam in Britain, on Muslim presence in Britain. I would certainly consider people like my father's generation who arrived here as migrants after World War II as being Muslims in Britain. Certainly before then, when people travelled here as tradesmen and settled here temporarily, they were Muslims in Britain. I'm not really sure if we can still talk about Muslims in Britain anymore. What happened really from the 1916s onwards was a transfer from being Muslims in Britain to Muslims of Britain. And although it seems like a simple shift from in to of, it's actually quite significant. It's a transfer that's happening in different layers and at different speeds. It starts off with pure legal rights, and under the 1948 Nationality Act, when people came here to rebuild Britain after World War II, from the former states under the British Empire, they had to register in this country under the 1948 Act. And simply by registering, they had full legal rights. But it's not just about legal rights, it's about understanding where you are, and eventually that leads to an interpretation of religion itself. How do we understand religious thought when many of the ideas were based in a world when broad territories were quite different to what they are today? How do we understand things in terms of a minority? How do we understand things when things are not about migrating, but about being born here, about this being your natural home? And some other thoughts about how foreign is Islam. Often we view our religion through the people that we associate with or the news that we hear. And there is a tendency to view the Islamic, if you like, as something foreign. Whereas conceptually, the Abrahamic faith, they're all foreign in a sense. And so in that respect, something like Islam is no less or no more foreign than, say, Christianity, in terms of its origins, in terms of its history. And yet we tend to understand Islam through the people that we rub shoulders with. And because of the migratory patterns over the last, during the 60s and the 70s, we often perceive Islam as something foreign. But that is changing, and that's part of this shift from being Muslims in to being Muslims of. Also, very quickly, you often hear of this phrase, and this comes up from time to time in contemporary debates. You'll hear it sometimes on responses and comments in the website. You often hear it in the heat of debate on Radio 4, Radio 5. It's been said, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. You often hear that about debates. But the point is, we're not in Rome. We are of Rome. We are Rome. We're part of the fabric. Then there are some broader historical issues that I do believe Muslims need to be more acquainted with. And that's the relationship that Europe has had traditionally with religion. In fact, it's fair to ask ourselves, is Europe frightened of religion? But alongside that, is Islamic thought frightened of Europe? And that's something that we need some introspection, that call for a degree of introspection. As we develop ideas and our understanding of religion vis-a-vis a European setting, are there things that we are afraid of? Are there things that we are uncomfortable with deconstructing and reinterpreting? Just some initial thoughts for us. Now, very quickly, just to give you a broad overview, in terms of European Muslims in the EU. Now, the EU doesn't mean all of Europe, it's the European Union. So this would exclude Muslim majority countries such as Turkey and Bosnia. But we have an there are an estimated 12 to 17 million Muslims in Europe, or part of Europe, I should say. And the ethnic diversity there is very, very wide. Muslims, remember, are just ordinary people. They subscribe to a belief, and the way that they manifest those beliefs will be affected by their culture, by how they've been brought up, by their social class, by their education. There are a variety of factors there. And so you will find, as in terms of broad majority groupings, Turkish, Algerian and Moroccan backgrounds are the largest, and then after that Pakistanis. But it's much more complex than that. London is one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world in terms of its Muslim makeup. An estimated 50 backgrounds make up London's Muslims. The countries with the highest Muslim populations are France, Germany, and then the United Kingdom. So just some quick numbers. I ask this quite a lot. I mean, I spend a great deal of my time doing training and to a number of groups, government bodies, police, the Foreign Office, people in local and regional government. And it's surprising the variation we get with regards to these figures. But in terms of how many Muslims there are in the United Kingdom, does anybody know? What would we say? How many Muslims are there in the United Kingdom? What would you say?
5 million.
5 million. Any other takers? 3 million? 2.4? 1.5? Okay. Anything above 5? Anything below 1.5? Well, let's go on. How many of the UK households are what you would call Muslim households? What would we say? What percentage? Let's give it a percentage. 30% of households in the UK are Muslim households. What else? 5%? What, 5%? Okay. Anything higher than 30? Anything lower than 5? Anything in between? Does anyone want to sort of sit on the fence and go in between? Does anybody think 10? Does anybody think 15? Okay, so we've got between 5 and that. 5 and 30. British Muslims make up how much of the world's Muslims? So of all of the world's Muslims put together, what percentage do British Muslims make up? Do we make up 5% of the world's Muslims? 10%? What do we think? Any takers? 20? What did I hear? 5% of the world's Muslims, okay. 1% of the world's Muslims? 0.2? Who said 0.2? Okay, maths teacher over there. Where else? What would you say?
0.3.
0.3. Okay, not bad. Where do the majority of British Muslims live? Bradford, did I hear Bradford? Yes. Okay, Bradford. Any other takers?
London.
Birmingham? London? Okay, London said with. Okay, and lastly, in this last general election, there were 570 seats up for grabs. Okay? Now, registered voters, you need to be over 18. Okay? So we need to get that right. It's 18, you have to be registered. How many of the 570 seats had Muslim voters? Now, let's just to make it sensible, let's just say a minimum of 25. So how many of the 570 seats in England and Wales had Muslim voters?